Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Innovation Spotlight 005. Halfway on the way to double digits. We're nearly getting there. I just wanted to welcome you all to the call. Wanted to do a quick shout out to the M360 Doha event that we're coming up in next week. Registrations are still open, and we'll share the chat for that in the window. I'm really excited about today's session because it's kind of got the Middle Eastern theme, but we've got a guest joining us from one of the MENA groups to come talk to us. In terms of housekeeping, pretty straightforward. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Do ask any questions in the comments as we go through today's session. And let's dive right in. Rich, anything you want to say just before we get in?
Yeah, hi there. It's Rich, the dark thing that you can see with the two brighter backgrounds. So many apologies. Just on cue. Yeah, hi there. I'm on my way to Faku today. So just going to COP around one of the other foundry projects which we're running with Huawei, looking at green power. So really excited about that. I'm really excited to be here talking today. You know, this is going to be, I think, a bit of a mind bender again around, you know, quantum and those types of things. So really excited to try and learn more.
Cool. And without further ado, let me introduce Merouane Debbah. Merouane, welcome to the Innovation Spotlight. Merouane, you're a director of 60 Research Center at Khalifa University, one of the leading universities in the Middle East. We're at a really interesting intersection between AI and telecoms. But you're not just an academic in this space. You've been involved in the telco industry. Tell us about your story. Tell us what your journey.
Yeah, I've been. So first of all, thank you. It's great to be with you here, and especially present the couple of things that we're doing here, which are outstanding at the intersection of AI and telecom here in the Middle East. So as far as I'm concerned, I've been working at the interface, of course, of industry and academia for many years, and I think this exchange between industry and academia is quite important, especially in the telecom domain, where you want to see your ideas being transferred, of course, to standardization and being impacted. And then you want to rebuild basically the kind of foundation every 10 years within this generation. So I've been working and started my career at Motorola Labs in the beginning of the 2000s, then worked for a research center sponsored by Siemens, which was in Vienna, then turned back to academia for many years, where I was assistant professor at Eurocom, which is in Sophia Antipolis, which is in the south of France, then became professor at Centrale Supélec in Paris, and then joined Huawei as vice president of their research during more than 7 years. And then moved 4 years ago here in the Middle East with two basically positions. One, taking the lead as a chief scientist at the Technology Innovation Institute, which is an applied research center working mostly on various domains, AI, telecom, cybersecurity, and others. And since like 2 years now, nearly 2 years, I'm now professor here at Khalifa University and director of a 6G center that we started 2 years ago.
Fantastic. I think that's one of the things that we've kind of crossed paths a couple of times before, and it's good to hear that you're back in the research. I think one of the things that kind of struck me most about this AI piece that we're seeing is just how close academia and telco is kind of coming together, because it's at the forefront of, everybody wants to move much quicker, and a lot of the research elements are, a lot of the operators are working more closely with universities now more than ever. And especially because of the knowledge, the expertise, and the resources that the universities can provide. I think that gap between R&D and implementation is getting shorter and shorter, and I think that's something that we're going to see in the future. You're obviously working on TelecomGPT as part of your work at the 6G Center. How's that shaping up, and how's that looking? Yeah.
Well, quite good. I mean, 4 years ago, I started working here in the UAE by building basically their Gen AI capability and mostly working on what we call foundational models, but not on the verticals. And so basically, we started building a big model in Arabic called Noor with 10 billion parameters. And then we started building basically what we call the Falcon series, which are quite known as basically foundational models. And especially in 2023, when two of the models that we built were ranked top one in the open source community. And so what we've been seeing now basically is, of course, the use of these models basically into some verticals. And one of the verticals that, of course, I've been working quite intensively, I would say that more than a year now, is looking, of course, as the usage of basically telecom or GPT, basically in the telecom domain. So for people who are not knowledgeable about what we mean by that, is basically the AI realm has been going through various, of course, phases. And quite recently in 2021, of course, and I think you're all familiar with ChatGPT, and especially in 2022, came basically these large language models and the GPT era, which is based on an architecture which is called the transformer architecture. So what we did is of course, try to look at how we could do three things. The first one is building a model for the telecom industry. And that was very important. And that's the TelecomGPT 1.0 that we built, which is a knowledge-based model, meaning basically it's fine-tuned on all the knowledge that you have in telecom, taking paper in standardization, taking paper basically, of course, in archive, everything that you can find in telecom. And so you could nearly ask any question you wanted in the telecom domain. And I know for my colleagues who work in standardization, this is extremely difficult, where you're like looking for a document, or you want to generate basically a standardization document. These are quite formatted with AI. But it goes much beyond that, because we have also code capability where we can generate in C code or Python code some of the features that you have basically in a standardization process, 5G, 4G, and others. But also things that are coming up also with multimodality, where people want to incorporate images. And you take a picture typically of a Wi-Fi router in your house, and you just ask your telecom GPT, hey, tell me what's wrong with my box? And then it gives you some features and what you have to do, which reduces, of course, the issues of call centers. But I think this is one just part that we've been doing. And by the way, this telecom-GPT got a lot of attraction worldwide. It was released last July. And we're quite happy because we're seeing a lot of interest from operators, from manufacturers, to start using basically the model that we have issued in, of course, enhancing productivity within the different domains. But again, telecom is not just about basically knowledge. It's also about incorporating features and modalities which go higher than just language. In telecom domain, we have radio frequencies, for example, so RF. And so we are now in the stage, of course, are also building something called RF GPT for sensing capabilities and others. And this is quite important because basically you want to incorporate knowledge where you input the RF type of environment, which is your 3D signatures, to be able to generate basically the most probable image of your environment, and many other things that you can think about. And the third thing also that we're working is, of course, on agents. And this is the big thing this year and next year, what it's called agentic AI, and building, of course, models which are trained or fine-tuned on the telecom domain, not only just to give you conversational or results, but who action. And actionable, basically, models are very important, meaning that you're not just asking a question, but you're telling, do this to me. And then it goes the whole pipeline. And so this TelecomGPT, we're very proud of having been able to establish it here. And we're going through a lot of collaboration. I'm at the moment chairman of an IEEE initiative, which is gathering a multitude of industry players to discuss, of course, what needs to be done in pushing more forward TelecomGPT.
That's really fascinating. And to me, this sounds like we're going more specific on some of those models which are being built. And, you know, I know that TelecomGPT has been making waves in the industry and, you know, even outperforming some of the other models that we've heard about. What is it, you know, that's enabling it to do that? Is it the specificity of the model itself?
Yeah, so good question. We of course, you got a lot of attraction because we're beating basically on several benchmarks. What Llama is doing, what OpenAI with GPT-4 is doing, what Mistral is doing. And of course, you can ask me what we've been doing. Well, basically, it's exactly the fact that we've been very careful in gathering very good data, high quality data, filtered data, and being able to fine tune basically our models on that exactly super great data. And of course, the models we're building have a certain number of parameters which also enable basically those kind of things. Now, related to your question, of course, the story is still ongoing because every time, of course, we are retraining the model to go more forward in enhancing its capability with more knowledge. And those models now are being discussed by various industry players to be used internally and also fine-tuned on their own data. Because what we've been using, of course, is open source data to basically create the TelecomGPT. But that's just the beginning, where you can take it and based on the 70 years, 50 years, depending on the companies, or 30 years of experience, you have a lot of knowledge which is gathered there, on which you can have a super great fine-tuned model, which will give you all the kind of performance that you're doing. One point I want to mention also is that we live in an industry where also AI is very pervasive. And a lot of the work that we're doing now is also to port TelecomGPT to be able to run on devices. Because one of the things we're in an industry where not everything is on the cloud. People have mobile phones, they have servers, and you want, of course, all these things. And this is what we call on working on TelecomGPT, which is ported on small models and small devices.
I think that's kind of the development of the agentic side of things. You know, like you say, you want to have it as close and as small a model as possible, because we're seeing increasingly people are moving away from general purpose LLMs to small industry specific SLMs, small language models, to drive that sort of space. Now, one question that I had, just because you were talking about the data and that side of things, obviously hallucinations kind of come up, and especially within this particular context, you know, you don't want to get a funny answer coming from yours. We see disclaimers coming on the bottom of Perplexity and ChatGPT around the quality of the content. How do you guys ensure that what you're pushing out in terms of TelecomGPT via the agents, or indeed to the end user, is accurate and is verifiable?
So that's a good question. So there's a couple of things first. The first thing, of course, when you start building a model, that's what you did, is to know what your model, what cause it's serving. And this is what we call evaluation or benchmarks. And so we'll talk about it maybe afterwards on the whole work that we did in already issuing some benchmark on how to evaluate models, because it's not very evident to know how can you say that your model is good. And so you need to come up with some evaluations that you define, and the industry has to define, to say, okay, whenever my model is able to succeed all these questions and answers, then basically it's ranked number 1, number 2, number 3. So first of all, as you said, we need before to define what we want from the model. And that's the kind of work that we did. We developed a couple of evaluation benchmarks, which are now available for the community, where now, of course, they can play with them and understand basically what we're aiming from a model. Because, of course, that has a big impact on how you will be doing basically your fine-tuning and instruct tuning. Then, of course, what we did is, of course, use telecom experts. Yeah. Because not only about AI, you need, of course, the domain experts to be there and basically, of course, write up all the questions, be able to also be there for the alignment. And this is a team that we had here, basically the UE, which is quite good in all the telecom domain and the knowledge domain, which could, of course, clean the data that we had and make sure that, of course, our model was aligned with the different features. Now, what you're asking at the end is still a bit of an issue in terms of making sure that, you know, you have no hallucination, and this is the kind of work that we're continuing, but the whole industry is in the same situation.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. And, you know, I think benchmarking, testing, evaluation metrics is going to be absolutely key. And that's one of the areas that we're going to be working with you guys on in this space. You know, how much importance would you place on benchmarking necessary for the telco space in this?
This is extremely important, because this is at the heart of use cases. It really is important that the community, and we're very happy to work with you at the GSMA level, to start defining basically what the community wants out of the models in terms of improving energy efficiency, a couple of things that you want basically from your models to be done. And benchmarking is at the heart of course, basically creating leaderboards. So we started with you at the GSMA level to start creating a leaderboard at the moment, where basically we can rank models in a very basically transparent manner. And this is, first of all, quite important because it helps the industry to kickstart also the motivation of building models. So, you know, and competition is good because people can rank themselves, see what's missing, how you can improve. And these leaderboards are extremely important because in general, people don't understand, but whenever you train a model or a pre-trained model, it's all about basically predicting the next word. But at the end, you're not interested by a model who can predict the next word. You really basically want to have basically where you steer the knowledge which is inside towards some of the capabilities that you want from those models. Today, of course, we have started building those models with a couple of industry players. Huawei is one, for example, one of them, and building basically those kind of benchmark. But we need more and more the industry, and this is why your role at the GSMA level is extremely important, to gather basically all this community in terms of defining what we want basically from Gen AI to be able to do, so that the people like us who are training those models can offer those platforms and then it can be used for the use cases, and then improvement can be done, as I said, on these leaderboard to get, of course, the kind of accuracy, avoid the kind of hallucination that we're thinking about. And of course, for example, the use case of energy efficiency is extremely important today for the telecommunication industry. We know it. And we need to come back with some rankings and evaluation that can provide basically those capabilities.
I think that's that's really important, getting those lessons. And I think it's just a reminder for everybody on the call. If you've got any questions, you'd like to ask, just please do put them in a chat. Sorry, Faze, it looks like you're about to say something.
No. Thanks for the nudge, Rich. I think one of the questions that I had was around open source and proprietary, right? So there's the age-old debate kind of thing. You guys are working on this model. It's performing much better than the GPU models that are out there. How do you see the space kind of evolving? How are people accessing it? How are people how do you envisage this space to kind of work for TelecomGPT?
So that's a very good question. The first thing that people need to first acknowledge is the definition of open source is still not totally clear in the Gen AI space. What I mean by that is that the majority of people are talking about open source is just about releasing the weights. They don't release their code. They don't release their data sets, which is a bit of an issue because I think this is also some work that we need to do together to provide some open data sets for the community to start playing around, because this is how basically a community can evolve and make models which are much better. Now, your question is very relevant because already outside the realm of the telecom domain, we are seeing, of course, people building at the realm of foundational models, either open source and, of course, closed source models. The majority of closed source models, of course, have extremely good capability at the moment. And one of the reasons is that when you serve a model, you also get feedback. Clear? So whenever you serve, and this is what we want to do also at the GSMA level, we want those models to be served so we can understand how people and customers, users are using them. Because at the moment you start understanding how the users are using them, then of course you can play with them. The problem of serving models, and we talked to you already for the benchmarking, is that it has a cost. Because at the moment you start serving for a community, then of course the prompts they're putting is going on. So I think the thing that has to be solved today for the open source community is building those models and trying to find ways through foundation, through organization, through sponsorship or whatever, to get also the ability for people to be able to use them basically on their servers. And we know how GPUs are costly for many of our colleagues here. And so using them is very instructive, because then you also learn a lot on how you can make those open source models even better because of the feedback that you get. Now, whatever model we do, and I think this is quite important also to say to the public, the TelecomGPT is based, of course, on data which is openly available there. Now, all these models will be at one moment on the TelecomGPT realm performing much, much better when each, and this is quite good, each company is going to be using it based on its internal knowledge. And this is exactly what makes it specific. A TelecomGPT model of Orange will not be the same when it's fine-tuned than a TelecomGPT model of Etisalat. Because the legacy of knowledge, legacy of your workers who have gone in the field, who have provided information on how to repair different base stations and things like that, is extremely good input, basically, to provide a model that can serve, for example, very efficient call centers where you don't need to call anymore, because basically you have, of course, the capability of knowing, at least on the first check, what you can do. And then on the second check, when it gets complicated, of course, you can go and ask remotely your question.
I think this is one of the key points between knowledge and wisdom, in the sense that you can put all the data in and it will give you a knowledge-based answer. But this is where we still need the human element to provide that wisdom to ensure that it is indeed the way that it's going. You touched on, obviously, the work that we do at the GSMA, the collaboration element. A shameless plug, we have our AI summit taking place on the 26th, 27th of November. That will be taking place in London. And this is exactly what the purpose of the session is, to bring the community together to work out what are those high-level industry-sized problems that we need to address, be it in the GSMA, but through our membership as well. And pleased to have you guys involved in the mix. The benchmarking, or a number of the topics that you touched on, we're going to be discussing there. So
a comment on the benchmarking that I need to mention.
Yeah.
We're very happy to work with you. Maybe a lot of our audiences do not know, but we've been working intensively in the last 2 months with you in trying to build this leaderboard. And it's going to be announced basically in a couple of days. And thanks to you, basically on announcing this leaderboard that we want to make available for the whole community, where they could also, of course, check the relevance of their model, check, of course, their ranking of the model, and also come up with new evaluation benchmarks. So we've been working quite closely at the moment with Hugging Face, and we're going to make an announcement with you in a couple of days, and we're quite happy with that.
He's releasing all the secrets ahead of all time.
That's why you got to come to these spotlights, isn't it? You find
that's
out
it.
early, isn't it? Right. So we talked about wisdom.
Cool.
Exactly. We talked about wisdom a few minutes ago. What's from your perspective? What's like the biggest misconception that people have about large language models, especially when it comes to their application in telecoms?
Yeah. So I think people were not. So there's two things. The first thing is people have not seen yet the potential and have not realized the whole amount of things that we can do basically with these TelecomGPTs. And I think there is huge potential today, and we're seeing it in terms of increased productivity. The thing that people don't realize is that it has to still be very specific to each country, to each domain. I explained. Here we are basically at the moment in the UAE. We have a country with many different population. We need basically, for example, to fine-tune TelecomGPT in Hindi. We need to fine-tune it also basically in Arabic. All these languages, which are quite important, because the customers which are using it at the end are people who are living there. So that's the first thing. There's not like a universal. And that's exactly something that gets a bit complicated, because you start pouring it also not only the language, which is the telecom language, but also the fact that people who are working with it are very diverse. And so you need also to be very linked to how people are using it. And I think that's already a misconception, to have a one global TelecomGPT, one size fits for all, where you would be using it in US for your customers, and then using it also in India for other types of customers who do not speak English at all. And so I think it's quite important to do that. The second misconception is that it's also something that goes above all the layers. I've been talking about the knowledge layer, but I told you we were also working at the RAM, radio access network layer, meaning going on the physical part. And you have to know, of course, that today there's a couple of alliances. One is called the AI RAN Alliance. Another one also an alliance called the AI Alliance with operators, which are looking at these different features depending on where you go on the different layers of the telecom stack. And I think this is also quite important for the people to understand, which makes also things a bit more difficult in how you build those models. Because if you stay at the higher layer, you're really at the language part. When you go down to layers which are much lower, you go at the frequency, what you in general manipulate basically around those models. And I think that's also quite important for the public to understand in terms of capability of these models.
Yeah, and a shout out to Alex Jinsung Joy. He was presenting at one of our SG meetings on the AI RAN Alliance, and looking at how we can more closely collaborate with those guys. So I think it's definitely one of the spaces that's quickly evolving. Kind of to broaden it out a little bit, because I know we've been focusing a lot on TelecomGPT and that side of things. The pace of change, the rate of change in AI has just been phenomenal. Over the last 12 months, we've seen, if you don't know, you better get to know. And if you get to know, then you're basically using AI, and you were like, why wasn't this, around 10 years ago? How do you see, particularly the advancements over the next 5-10 years around AI in general, and how it's going to impact society and the way that we see it? One of the interesting things that somebody was saying was, as we become so overly reliant on ChatGPT and those sorts of things, that leads to a bit of a dumbing down of society. I don't know if you've got any thoughts around this and where we're.
Yes, I do. I do, and I think this goes and revolve in the fact that we've been building here in the UAE a 6G center. So I've been working in the last 3 years, more or less, on building unique foundational models. Just building a model, making it better. What we're seeing, and this is what I'm seeing in the time of the next 5-10 years, is of course that AI is becoming more and more pervasive. Meaning you're having AI at each point of the network. Even at the IoT level, we'll get it, which means that we'll start to have TelecomGPT models, even basically at the IoT level, going on a phone and other points like that. And so one of the things that we started thinking about is the future is not going to be about single models that you're prompting, but about network of models. And the question is, what is the infrastructure that you need to build to connect basically a network of AI models, which is exactly what's going to happen. So let me just give you 2 examples of what we're seeing, which is totally different. Today, when you're transmitting basically data or a video from one point to another point of the network, usually you just do a compression scheme, and then you send the data, and on the other side, you decompress. However, if you have AI models and TelecomGPT very specified fine-tuned models, you would do video to text, typically to send a video. And then you will not send anymore the data, but just the instruction, which is the text. And you'll do text to video. Clear? And so by that, you can imagine the amount of compression that you're creating there, because it's not anymore data, which is moving on a network, but just instruction. Because in some sense, you're able to reconstruct based on only the prompt that I'm giving you. Now, if you do that, there's 2 caveats. The first caveat is you need to build systems which can do mobile edge generation at the speed of light with the latency that we have. And we have, of course, today, a lot of our colleagues, manufacturers, which are working on building inference processing units, very specific to do this mobile generation. So it's not based on GPUs, but it's based exactly on providing the number of tokens per second, which is quite rapidly. The second thing also that we're seeing is that these things are communicating like humans. What it means by that is if I ask you, Faisal, a question right now, you will obviously give me an answer with a certain text. If I ask you the same question in 2 hours, you'll give me the same answer, but you'll not be able to give me the same text, which means that we are creating systems which are able not to transmit meanings, but not perfect reconstruction. This is leading a new horizon of communication like humans called semantic communication. And I think this is something that is at the heart of what we need to build for the future. The second thing is the agentic stuff. The agentic stuff, of course, is now reassessing why we need apps. In the last Mobile World Congress, Dutch Telecom are already announcing app-free phones. Because when you think about it, why would you need an app? Why would you need to download Uber and then basically go on Uber, put your credit card, and do all the transactions? You just sit your phone, I want a car in 5 minutes down my house. From an LLM, you go to what we call an action model. And so your phone is going to be really empty, by the way. There's nothing, it's just going to be like a Google page. You're just going to have what you need to write, and then it will action basically the fact that your assistant or agent is going to be talking to a car assistant, negotiate the price and get it. And for a lot of features, we're going to have basically transactions of assistants talking on behalf of you. And I think this is a big game changer, because how you build a network today, which enables the scaling of a massive number, not of people, but of agents discussing to negotiate a price, to negotiate a delivery of a restaurant for you and things like that, is going to be revolutionizing basically the way we have been building networks until at the moment. And I think these 2 examples showcases you a lot of big potential that we're going. Now, the last point I want to mention, and I think it's also very important for all the people to notice, is that once you start building a network where you have connected intelligence, which is poured in, you could start building a new era of what I call solver engines. If you look at how internet...
again?
Solver engines. Solver, to solve.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at how the internet has been going on, we started basically the year 2000 with what we call search engines. We are at the moment of what we call conversational engines. So you're talking and you're asking, and it gives you all the things. The future is going to be when you start connecting on prompting a problem that you have, and the network will be starting to solve it around you. And I think this is a big game changer on how we do. We're already starting seeing some people asking, hey, I want to reduce the consumption of my network by 5%, but still guaranteeing basically a rate of each of my user of 50 megabits. This is a hard problem. When you give it to the machine, it will analyze that problem, convert it into a mathematical problem, and then you'll have a lot of agents which will cut the problem to sub problems and solve each one of them. We've been trying to work now on that, and we're seeing a big realm on that. And the last comment I want to do, this goes for my industrial telecom operator fellows. I think there is a big opportunity today for operators to get back a big piece of the cake that they lost all the years. I'm talking to all of you. I think you know we've been dumb pipes for many years, and we've been seeing all the value chain going on. And now what's happening is that we have a network in which basically we can connect, but we can compute, because we can basically have all these devices in a distributed manner which can compute. And so what it means is you can offer services for people that is running on the infrastructure of the telecom provider, which means on a subscription level, you could basically give subscription which sell connectivity, but also basically GPTs for services at a certain price per month. And I think it's the right good time, because we are the best position to provide that kind of quality of service, quality of experience, because of the fact that we're very close in terms of latency. So we can build what we call avatars, things like that, and you can see basically the things happening. And I think I'm not sure that the whole industry has captured this fact where the telecom infrastructure today has an asset that can be used massively and that you can leverage. And we can go back in the game quite aggressively as we did before.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a great opportunity here, and it's almost like the operators are kind of undervalued the position that they can play and the opportunity that's available there. One question that I had just around knowledge and domain expertise. Obviously you've been involved in AI for a number of years. One of the challenges with the operators is how do they bridge the gap? You have telecom expertise, but then you also need to learn domain-specific knowledge around AI. How much is that gap, and how do you think operators can best address this?
So that's a fantastic question. In fact, I've been before trying to build teams from the telecom industry to work on AI. And you have three ways of doing it. Either you take basically telecom people, take AI people, and try to make them work together. Either you take AI people and you tell them you're going to learn telecom. Either you take the telecom guys and you tell them, hey, you're going to learn AI now, so you can, build up. It turns out from my experience that the best that worked is to take the telecom people and tell them you're going to learn AI. Why? Because the telecom background turns out to be very good for that. You have electrical engineering background, you have mathematical background, you have a good of understanding, and ramping up in the machine learning domain, AI domain, turns out much easier than taking a person who's from AI and telling him you're going to learn telecom, which turns out to be extremely complicated. Making the two teams working turns out to be mentally the best solution, but you have to know that it's always a question of humans. You put two teams together, it can happen, and sometimes it can't happen. It's very hard because there are always, questions about how the people fit together. And my experience has been always, it's quite remarkable how telecom people can learn quite rapidly AI expertise. It's fantastic. You give them basically courses, and rapidly they ramp up. They have a super big knowledge of a legacy of all these years on how a frequency works, how a message works, how a transmission works, how a telecom network works, things like that. And you ramp them up because they have the good basis. So I think for all my colleagues, which are a bit frightened about jumping on this era, they are in the best position because the majority has an electrical engineering background, and that background turned out to be extremely good to ramp up in basically the AI domain.
No, that's absolutely. I love the insight there that it's a challenge, but it's not something that can be traversed. And just you have it sharing that experience about it might be scary. It's a bit of a jump, but do it, and they're well positioned to move into this space. So I think that's kind of cool. Just a reminder, if you've got any questions, we've got the Ask Me Anything question session coming up. So feel free to drop any in the chat. Merouane, we could probably talk about this topic for hours and hours. I'm going to go into some of the questions as we're going through. The first one coming up. So a lot of OEMs would not be open in sharing data, proprietary information and use cases. How would you expect to work around this, addressing data anonymity, privacy, and security?
Well, that's a very good question. And the way we've been working, of course, it's quite difficult, as you said, to share data. So what counts is, of course, to have a sort of and this is why your work at GSME will be fantastic, is to have some kind of common data, which does not have all these issues, on which we all agree and we're able to share it. So, of course, the open source one is a good one, plus on which, of course, a different consortium of companies are willing to share. And then the best way, of course, is then to take the model and then directly fine-tune it on the knowledge internal of those companies. Like taking basically really the model and pushing it towards the industry and doing it internally. That's the best way to do it so far because of all the things you're sharing. Of course, on top of that, you have to know synthetic data helps. There are still some questions about how much synthetic data you need. I'm not talking about synthetic data, which is Gen AI data, because you have to know that, unfortunately, this is for all my colleagues who are listening to me. You cannot train and improve a model that is trained on Gen AI data. This is not possible because basically you're training on your own knowledge and you have something called model collapse. However, building some good synthetic data, which is based on digital twins, ray tracing, these are also providing basically some useful kind of data that improves your model. So what I mean by that is that we also need to work out more and more on building digital twin networks. We would use your cities and things like that. And this is a lot of capability that we can bring to solve some of the issues which are around sharing data by operators.
I think that's one of certainly the topics that we're going to be discussing around the data brokerage and how we can kind of spin that up in the future. You touched on digital twins. Digital twins is an important topic within this space. I know we've gone very, very deep into LLMs and that side of things. How important do you think that is going to be in terms of network planning and that sort of thing? I know network planning is one use case, but how quickly do you think we'll go from agentic services and having fully autonomous networks that have digital twins and we're basically running our networks based on these new ways of doing things?
I think it's going to go hand by hand and quite fast because a lot of these digital twins, of course, run on GPUs. And of course, we're quite happy because we can leverage basically at the same time the training and the fact that we're running basically these digital twins. And they're quite important because today, the models that we're having of network are becoming more and more quite realistic in terms of generating the kind of data that we have in terms of reconfiguration and things like that. And so my feeling is that it's not going to take many years, and I'm seeing things in the next 3 years, to be honest. And of course, the capability of these models to update themselves quite rapidly with the kind of synthetic data and reconfiguration that they're doing to go. Now, on the full synthetic kind of network that you want to build based on agentic AI, I think this is going to take a bit more time. It's been years, of course, that people have been talking about software-defined radio and then imposing some kind of configuration SDR and then going on. I think we're still not up to that, but it's going to take a bit of time. But today, of course, the models that we're building are having more and more bit of capability of actioning. And I think this will not take 3 years, but in the next, I would say, before 10 years, we will be able to have these networks that are totally self-organized in the way we're built by basically agents that know how to go forward.
I think we just got one more question from actually the audience, and I think we touched on it earlier, but we were talking about benchmarking. But the question is, what kind of KPIs would you expect to see or use to evaluate a model?
So this is a very good question. At this stage, you're going to see it in 1 week, normally 1 or 2 weeks. Basically, we've been looking, there's a benchmark that we built called the TeleQ&A benchmark, which is basically more on knowledge base, meaning you want to evaluate your model on capability of writing a C code related to some features in 5G typically, or you want basically your model to respond to some questions which are very specific and deep in the 5G release 16, for example. And so these are what we call basically knowledge based. They were constructed by telecom expert, and we have one which is called the TeleQ&A, and that is one KPI that we're doing. However, we think that that's not so far in terms of being too deep in how networks are building. And this is where we think that the work that has to be done with GSMA is, of course, to sit down with nearly everybody to start defining other KPIs, which are energy efficiency, some latency requirements, all these things to be able to assess your model and capability. But then to your question, how we do it, well, of course, we run our model in this series of questions. And then, of course, we have a number of questions which are successful and answered, others which are not. And then basically we're able to rank your model with those KPIs that we did. So today we have 4 benchmarks, to be honest, which are available for the telecom domain. We want, of course, people to start building more and more based on some use cases that they have found, especially with more reasoning capability in terms of the way. But what we're doing for information is not different from what people have been doing in the foundational domain, but also in other domain like cybersecurity. I'm working with some close colleagues in the cybersecurity domain, and for the same thing, they're building knowledge-based models that can, of course, ask any question. And now they're building KPIs which are related to the detection of CVEs, for example, which are vulnerabilities that you get. And these are trained on data sets.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. I know we're nearly out of time, really has shot by, but just a quick one, learning a bit more about yourself, really, making it a bit more personal about you. Looking back at your career, what's the most surprising or unexpected development you've witnessed in either AI or telecoms that you never imagined would happen?
That's a very good question. I think certainly what happened, the acceleration that we saw in the last 2 years in the Gen AI field, I think that was really unexpected on coming up, and also the surprising result. So let's be very frank with all the people. The GPT revolution did not start in 2022. It started basically in 2017 with a paper quite known called "Attention is All You Need," done by people from DeepMind, from Google Brain, the University of Toronto. They started building GPT-1, GPT-2, and GPT-3. What was very surprising for us is the interface. And I think this is what created a lot of hype. The fact that it's not very specific users which are using it, but it's your mother, it's your kid. We were able to bring down, because everybody was talking about AI. I mean, CNN, convolution network, everybody was talking about that, but it was always at the level of very high level expert. Nobody could really use it. The fact that we're bringing down our capability to do that at a very low level, this is what surprised me. And I think also from a network educational perspective, the engineers that we're building are now also moving in our field where they can express with words what they want from something or a network, and then it executes, which is also very surprising, because today you can say in your own language what you want, and then the code appears. You don't need to code that. And I think that is very surprising. And it all will, of course, accelerate the progress that we're seeing, because the more you give it to a massive number of users, the more you'll find new ideas on how it can be used. And I think this is very good for our innovation perspective in the telecom domain.
Merouane, I feel like we've just tipped touched the tip of the iceberg with all of the topics. I think we've got to definitely bring you back again for a little bit more of a deep dive into this topic, because absolutely fascinating. And every time I talk to you, my mind is blown. In terms of the
Thank
insights
you.
and the knowledge that you have. So definitely want to welcome you back. A bit of a curveball, this one. We've taken a tradition from Diary of CEO podcast. Shout out to Stephen Bartlett. The question comes from the previous speaker that we had on the call, and this was from Antonio Franchi. Now, I think you may have already touched on it a little bit, which kind of goes to show how impressive your brain is, because there's talk about the Internet of Minds, the idea of accessing the internet directly from our minds. One of the things that you mentioned was around Neuralink, which Elon Musk has been working on. How disruptive do you think a brain-computer internet will be when we're all connected in a big cloud? And when do you think that would be?
So that goes beyond the 10-year time frame that you told me about, but I strongly believe that we'll go towards that, because when you think of how we build network, we built them at the beginning for mobile for voice. Then we did mobile for data. That was 3G. Mobile for internet. That was 5G. We did it for mobile for things. That was IoT and 5G. Now we're doing it for mobile for intelligence, where we want to connect brains, which are machine-based brains. I think the 7G part is basically to create the network where we interact with agents, because agents are interacting. We'll build up the internet of agents. That's great. They will, and of course, this requires some speeds, things like that. But then when you start building basically a network where we are involved and we start communicating with this is going to be a big thing. And I think this Neuralink stuff like that is part of the story. And I think it's going to happen, but in more than 10 years. Let's take it for 2040.
2040. Sounds good. I still got time. So, that's all good. The next question kind of follows on is, what question would you pose to our next guest? Could be about anything.
Good.
Could be about life, business, work, technology, anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question that comes to my mind today is still about the role of humans within basically the world of intelligence. The fact that AI is now being built is posing some question and re-questioning our role. What is exactly our role at the end? I have, of course, an answer for that, but I'll be very interested to understand basically from the perspective of the next speaker, how he see human working with basically AIs. What's the role of these humans behind these AIs, and how we're going to cope with them? I think from my point of view, and that's my answer, but I would be very happy from his side, I think the role of all these AIs are to accelerate the solution of the problems that we have, but they will not be able to question the world. And we will be having more and more people who question rather than basically, or make problems rather than solve problems. I give you just an example quite rapidly. If you had the opportunity of using ChatGPT, you'll see that the value of the response you get is based on the value of the question you ask. So it's quite important to spend a lot of time questioning the right way. Machines are now able to solve rapidly. And I don't know if some of my colleagues in the audience have done some PhDs. In a PhD, 90% of the work is to come up with a problem. Once you came up with a problem, then the answer is easy. In any work, that's what you do. And I think our role will shift, and this is what humanity is about, into more and more spending time in defining the right problem, because once we define it, we will have the tools which are quite rapid to solve it, which until now was mostly about trying to find a solution to problem. And that's, by the way, how we educate kids. I think you know it. Educating kids today is mostly about giving them exercise, and you rank them how fast they were able to solve it. But you don't rank kids anymore on their capability of coming up with problems. And I think this is something which is going to be changing, and which defines, in some sense, our role within basically the realm of all this pervasive AI. But I want to let the next speaker to tell more how he sees humans basically in the middle of all these super AI, Gen AI, whatever you call them, appearing.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Just to shout out, it's a great question that you ask, because I could probably ask. I'm literally trying to stop my brain from asking you a follow-on question, because I know we're running out of time. We've got Priya Kurian from IBM who's going to be talking to us about this AI topic, and I think it'll be a great question to pose to her. I know you didn't know who we were having, but I kind of keep that as a little bit of a teaser for next time. But,
and I know she'll love that. She'll love that question as well. No,
that's cool. Love it. With that being said, I think we're well over time. Merouane, let me just say thank you from the GSMA and GSMA Foundry. Looking forward to collaborating with in the near future. For those of you who are watching, just want to say do ask any questions in the chat. Give us any comments and feedback about who you want to see coming into 2025 around these sessions. But I think, Merouane, thanks very much.
Thank you. Great being with you, both of you, Rich and Faisal. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Bye.